Monumental painting is actively developing in Kazakhstan, as well as all over the world. You must have noticed that some of the walls of old houses around the city are now decorated with paintings. They are called murals. It is a unique type of monumental painting, which has features of both traditional frescoes and modern street art. The word mural comes from the Latin word murus, which means wall. Today, any work of art painted or applied directly to a wall, ceiling, or other large permanent surfaces can be considered as a mural. The history of murals has very ancient roots. The earliest ones are the drawings made more than 30,000 years ago by prehistoric people in the Chauvet cave in France. Rock images in the Tamgala tract can also be attributed to this type of art, just like the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel and many other works, but murals only began to develop as an independent branch of art about 100 years ago in Mexico. It was in this Latin American country that a new type of monumental art emerged during the revolutionary events of the 20s of the last century. Since the end of the 19th century till the beginning of the 20th century, monumental painting was very actively practiced in the USA and Mexico. Monumental painting was used as advertising. It was impossible to print a banner, there were no LED screens, and people drew advertising images by hand. Until about the middle of the 20th century, monumental painting was used as a means of propaganda. The United States of America, the USSR, Mexico, Italy, and other countries promoted their ideology through murals. And later, a cultural boom began in the US, which could completely destroy murals as a form of art. At the end of 60s, 70s, a marginal subculture of graffiti appears in New York and begins to spread across the USA. In the 80s, graffiti becomes a symbol of hip-hop. In the late 80s and early 90s, graffiti reaches Europe. Graffiti culture allowed young people to express their protest. Street artists ruthlessly painted the walls of houses, fences, and even subway cars with spray paint. Local authorities have been fighting against artistic outrage for dozens of years, though without success. This trend has been developing in our country as well. Kazakhstan has its own experience of graffiti subculture. It is somewhere different from global trends and development of subcultures around the world. In the graffiti world, Kazakhstan is quite different. Graffiti culture in our country had purely creative spirit. All of Kazakhstani prominent street artists started to use spray paint on walls to express themselves rather than to protest anything. One day a Croatian priest passed by here, but he was concerned, apparently, because at that time in Croatia, graffiti culture tags everything related to the criminal world. So he tried to guide me towards the right path. And I said, no, it's just art. He's the only person I ever talked to about what I was painting. Of course, this attitude towards street art was not groundless. Graffiti was considered something marginal, although most of the time it was a way for the artists themselves to find their vocation. Many of them went to art schools and academies afterwards. All the art was spilling out on the streets. Why are we standing here? One of the first drawings used to be on that wall, as I recall. My friend Alexander, he lives abroad now. Hacker, Plexus, and we did it all on the streets of the city. That was interesting. Of course, most of the time unauthorized artwork provoked a negative reaction from the majority of people of older generation. For decades, communal services struggled until a rather unconventional solution to the problem was finally found. If you can't ban it, legalize it. The permission to create beautiful paintings on the facades of buildings not only reduced the number of chaotic and random graffiti, but also provided ample opportunities for young artists to self-actualize. The first murals in Kazakhstan, and particularly in the capital, appeared in the early 2000s. Probably one of the first mural was near Eurasia shopping mall. It was under construction back then. And the mural of some newspaper advertisement appeared on a 12-story building, I think on the 12th floor.
какой-то газеты.
Valery Ospanov had just turned 18 at the time. The young artist was approached by the director of one of the capital's newspapers. She asked him to paint the wall of the house where the editorial office was located. It was a commercial joint project, sponsored by a famous brand at that time. It was nearby Eurasia shopping mall. Perhaps many people even remember an enormous drawing. Now it is called a mural, while before that it was simply a huge graffiti. The payment for Valery was purely symbolic. He was simply interested in taking part in a project of such a large scale. It was some kind of a challenge for the young artist because no one had ever done anything like this in this city before. There was no technique at that time. We just figured out how we would draw it and started drawing. There was no information. It was difficult to download something. It is by this time that murals are becoming an independent art direction. It's being developed practically all over the world. In the early 2000s, street art grew wings and detached from the marginal subculture of graffiti. It became an independent culture. In the same early noughties, people start to use such a term as Banksy phenomenon. Banksy is the name of an English underground street art artist. There is much debate about his biography even up to this day. He is internationally recognized for his distinctive style of satirical street art. His works always portray the most acute social and political themes, and each of them causes a heated debate among the society. Banksy's influence on the street art popularization was insanely huge, and by 2010, street art is so popular that many cities around the world start to hold street art festivals. Kazakhstan was no exception. Since the 2010s, the first murals began to appear in many cities of the country. At first, this new for us art form was practiced by artists invited from abroad. At first, murals in Kazakhstan were mostly created by artists from other countries. More experienced and more famous guys were invited at that time, but throughout the years our artists improved and the level of their skills developed as well. So now our local artists are being invited to other countries for various festivals where they also create new works of art. The creative works of such scale are not left unnoticed all over the country. Since they attract attention, people like them, they start to take pictures and post them on social media. Therefore, the information spreads very quickly, so almost all the murals that are being created now are made by Kazakhstani artists. Murals are quickly becoming popular. Business owners are beginning to hire artists to decorate the walls. After all, it makes the buildings of various establishments look unique as well as contributes to the flow of new customers. In 2010, the authorities and the whole world in general start to understand that street art has become a mass culture. Absolutely everyone is interested in it. Everyone has heard of Banksy, and many people begin to realize that they can make money on street art. When we hold a street art festival, we invite different artists. New sightseeing places are created on the building facades, and it is possible to make profit off the tourism. That is why the Art Fest has been held in the capital since 2017. Organization of this event allowed artists from different countries to create several new artworks across the country, as well as attract thousands of tourists to the cities of Kazakhstan. Now artists are invited to participate in festivals because it facilitates artistic exchange. First of all, it prompts the mix of different styles and techniques. Also, people from abroad can have different perception of some things in our country. They see in their own way, which makes new visions appear. We're not just talking about murals, it's also about various cultural events, art objects, and much more. I suppose the first thing is that they draw attention to some theme that the artist conveys in his work. A person looks at it and it makes him think. The second is to unite local communities, let's say urbanistic artists. They unite, exchange experience, opinions, and so on.
и так далее.
But how exactly are murals created? It's one thing to paint on a canvas and quite another to paint on the wall of a huge building. Everything starts with a sketch. It is created by artists either in the studio on paper or in modern graphic programs. It can be overlaying of some of their own works and sketches on the photo. Sometimes sketches for certain facades might be developed separately because the building can have its own characteristics. There can be windows on the facade, some protruding architectural elements which can benefit the idea of the drawing itself. It is not enough just to come up with a drawing, it is important to get approval from the local authorities. However, nowadays, city leaders and authorities themselves are willing to offer artists space for creativity. Most often we have government contracts. Basically, it is practiced all over the world. It is very difficult for an artist to create such a huge artwork relying solely on his own resources. Therefore, either commercial projects with advertising campaigns for large companies are involved, or city authorities place an order to decorate a certain building. Naturally, since some sort of a customer is present here, most often they have their own wishes. Typically, artists are informed of a desired theme. After that, they provide several sketches, and when the desired option is agreed upon, the authors proceed to its realization. The realization itself, it is technically a bit difficult, but since it's the 21st century, there are some options. We can apply the projection on the facade of the building, and if it is not available, then you can calculate, measure and transfer a large image using a cellular method. And the only thing that can stop you from painting a mural is a fear of heights. After all, you must work in an aerial work platform at great heights for several hours. However, artists admit that you quickly get used to it. In general, what is so good about the murals nowadays is that the entire process is well coordinated and experienced artists are involved, or even artists with a name. Because it is always beautiful and all residents of the city, guests and all passers-by absolutely like it. And it's not just about aesthetics. Murals fulfill several functions at once. A well-built image can hide or, on the contrary, highlight certain features of architecture and thus make the urban environment more pleasant. And they also can serve as instruments of gentrification. It is when neighborhoods in decay are improved and beautified. As a result, this attracts new businesses and wealthier population moves there. Mural is an art form accessible to everyone. After all, one does not need to visit museums or galleries to be able to admire these beautiful works of art. Such paintings become landmarks and part of the urban spirit. They create a colorful environment in which you want to live. Besides, it is an excellent and legal way to realize your creative abilities. Well, as long as they're building the city out of cement and iron, I think graffiti will be appropriate. While we live in such conditions, we don't always want this grayness. You want to decorate, to express something, and as soon as creative people with rebellious spirits start to get something on paper, they obviously want to declare and demonstrate it. In any case, there is only one way out: to go and paint on the streets. The aesthetics of any city does not only involve architecture and beautiful buildings, it is also about sculptures, fountains, parks, and of course, murals.